Now, as a president looks to who they're going to talk to, there really are three main audiences. The politicians that are in D.C., the other leaders that are in D.C., the members of Congress, and whatever. Then the grassroots, the party activists. So, as the head of the party, the chief of the party, they also need to be able to communicate with them. They need to be able to communicate them their policies, and for the most part, align with what they're going to do. And then also they need to be aware of the public. Well, what are the criticisms? What are the opportunities that they have in order to please them to improve the approval rating that they might have? And of the three, the most important by far really is fellow politicians and other leaders that are in DC. So when they're talking, who are they talking to? Most of the time, they really are talking to other politicians and leaders because they're the ones who are going to actually make the action happen. So while all three are dependent on presidential recommendations, it really is the politicians and leaders who receive the most attention from the president as they're talking. So with that power of persuasion and that, the likability power of persuasion really, again, is the huge tool at the disposal of the president in order to accomplish their agenda, their proposed agenda. It goes along with the fact that they are in a perfect spot to do that. The White House, again, is one building representing one person, really representing the entire country. So the White House has an around the clock staff of journalists, the White House press corps, which we talked about with the media chapter, and they are always there for whatever the president wants. So it's so easy for media exposure for the president. They're able to use that position as an amazing avenue, podium to speak. And that's what the bully pulpit is a reference to, is the fact that it's an amazing podium for them to be able to pursue their agenda by getting people to listen to whatever it is they want to listen to. And that is, similar to the idea that the going public or getting pressure, improving their approval rating is going to impact members of Congress to vote along their lines, and it really does. They have multiple things that we looked at that really do impact the approval rating, but politicians in general pay attention to the presidential approval rating, and then of course senators and representatives do as well. So as we looked at the approval rating, there are numerous factors, and for the most part, they're out of the president's control because there are so many unforeseen circumstances that might arise through the course of their tenure. But they obviously, there are some general trends that I asked you to pay attention to. Number one, over time, it's very likely that it's going to decline, at least a little. It's going to decline a little. It's going to start high. It's going to start a little higher because of the honeymoon period. There's kind of that general consideration that is given. And so these jots, these turns, whatever, they all symbolize something beyond just what they have control over. They're all a part of something much bigger than just what they do have the ability to control. So as we look at also the responses from members of Congress and how they relate to the president, you also have to look at the fact that they're not as successful as they would like to be the entire time. I mean, obviously, we have checks and balances for a reason. So just because the president is well liked doesn't mean that Congress is just going to go along with whatever they say. Now, this graph is depicting when the president actually takes a stance on something. In other words, they maybe deliver it in the State of the Union, their specific stance on an issue where they recommend consideration on a bill or something of that matter. This is depicting what is the percentage of that bill going to be passed and how people respond to it that way. So there are many factors that go into this as well, but again, it's just kind of one of those things that relies on multiple factors. It's not just one or the other. So a few final things to talk about. The powers that aren't necessarily clear as others in the Constitution. First, the executive privilege. That's confidentiality. So the president's going to hear quite a lot of things throughout their time. I mean, President Trump has already alluded to the fact that he's heard more about national security than he ever thought was possible related to terrorism and terrorism threats. But he doesn't have to disclose those. You have to kind of think of the president working for somebody. I mean, the president is essentially, we are the boss of the president. we put them in that position. Popular sovereignty allows us to do that. But there is no requirement for the president to disclose to us, let alone, or to members of Congress, let alone us. So they have the ability to keep comments in confidence, do things in confidence without having to share that with other individuals. But it isn't absolute, as that kind of came out with U.S. versus Nixon, where there is a system of confidentiality with executive privilege, but they don't have to worry about it in terms of extreme issues. Just because the president is saying something doesn't mean that it's automatically covered by executive privilege. The last thing that the president has at their disposal, really, that has been addressed from Nixon, was impoundment of funds. So Congress controls the money. They're the wallet keepers. They get to decide where the money is going to go. But the impoundment of funds would mean then that the president doesn't actually spend it. So with the impoundment of funds, this is kind of like going behind the backs of members of Congress, where they're just going to say, no, I'm not going to spend the money that you told me to spend. And this is really one of those things that bothered Congress. So we kind of talked about how Nixon became rather the enemy of members of Congress. And one of the big ones was the War Powers Act, which defined when they could send troops and for how long. And if there was no declaration of war, how quickly they had to bring the troops back. Within 60 days, they had to start, and with 90, they had to be fully back. But then these two as well. The Budget Reform Act and Impoundment Control Act tried to express a concern for this in saying that members of Congress had allocated money to the president to spend, and if they were not going to spend it as they wanted, they had to have a pretty good reason in order to do that. And really what they were getting at is that it had to be spent how they wanted it to be spent. So the 25th Amendment is the last amendment that we have to talk about with the president, and that really is line of succession. We've talked about that quite a bit. It's not really that commonly used. However, we know that it's played a role. We have 8 that have died in office, 4 have been assassinated, and those 4, by the way, are all right here. You can see we have first President Lincoln, President Garfield, President McKinley, President Kennedy. They all were killed while they were in office. And that was before the 25th Amendment. It took the president dying of JFK to actually establish who is going to take over. And that was where the VP gets there. Now, if the president is ill, the VP is also there. And what that means is, like, if they were to have surgery, or maybe they weren't dead, but they couldn't perform their capacities, then they could rule that under the 25th Amendment, the cabinet had the power to decide that they were unfit to perform their duties. This is all still a part of the 25th Amendment, where they get to decide that the president can't perform their functions. So by declaring the president unfit, the VP would step in if the cabinet had decided it in the first place. And with the fact that if the VP steps in, or if both of them were to maybe die, the speaker would step in. Well, who becomes the VP? That would be from the new president. They get to choose who they want for a VP, but it does have to be confirmed by the chambers, both the House and the Senate, to support that. Last thing really is the impeachment. We know where that starts. It has to start in the House. The trial for removal is in the Senate, with the Chief Justice, the person in charge. Now, there really haven't been any big issues with the president in terms of removal. Both Johnson and Clinton were up for the trial, but neither one were removed. More judges have actually been impeached than presidents, and that's really because there are more. I mean, right now we have federal judges in the hundreds, so there are quite a few of those that really are up for impeachment throughout history, and they have been removed from office as well. There haven't been any Supreme Court justices, but federal judges, circuit district, they have been removed from their positions, which really is the only way for them to get fired, because they have the life tenure. It's either they get impeached and removed, they die, or they quit. So those are your options. And here we go. We are at the end now. This is just a quick list of those 8 who were not able to finish their terms. So you can see that we, again, had 4 who died from assassinations. The other ones were leaving before their terms were ending. So death, resignation. So When that happens, it did kind of throw things in a loop for a time, but the 25th Amendment established that and controlled any concerns afterwards. So just a quick recap of the amendments before we're out. We have the 25th, line of succession. 22nd, you are limited to 2 terms. You can complete 1/2 partial and then 2 terms max. The 20th, inauguration day, and then the 12th, which set up the Electoral College. Now, you should have your review handy before you are leaving. Remember, questions and terms are for Monday, quiz on Tuesday, where we will spend all day Monday getting ready and making sure that you are fit to go with everything that you will need. If you have any questions over the weekend, let me know. But otherwise, be safe, be smart, and